My name's Pete Tseronis, and I am super excited to be back here having a conversation, if you will, with my good friend and colleague, Maria Roat, on the Dots and Bridges Thought Leadership Consortium. I was fortunate to work in the federal government for 25 years. I've been out on my own for 5, and I have this optic where I can feel what it's like to be on the industry commercial side, but also draw on my experiences when I was a federal employee. I was blessed to be a member of the Senior Executive Service. And from that vantage point, after working my way up through the government, starting as a GS7, I had an interesting journey myself. Not much different than Miss Roat here, and we'll get into that in a minute. But today we hope to get that optic both inside of government, from where Maria sits in the Office of Management and Budget, talk about some of the exciting things happening inside of government, a little storytelling, a little conversation, and you might even learn something along the way, because here on the outside of the Beltway perspective, there's a lot we can be informed on, a lot that we can be educated on, and then hopefully enlightened as well. But before we get into that, and I do a little quick intro here to Miss Maria, the Office of Management and Budget is one of 6 executive offices that serves the presidential administration of the United States. You can read this on the website at whitehouse.gov, overseeing the implementation of vision across the executive branch, of which there are 3 in government. Specifically, OMB's mission is to assist the president in meeting policy, budget management, and regulatory objectives, and to fulfill the agency's statutory responsibilities. That being said, Maria Roat, the Deputy Federal Chief Information Officer, CIO for you IT geeks, embodies the consortium that we're speaking on today at Dots and Bridges, those tenets rooted in that education, information, and enlightenment perspective. So Maria, you are a change agent. You are, in my view, an inspiring influencer, and I'm very excited that you're here today to share some of those insights, both as a technologist, but also as a human being, and understanding the role that technology plays in our life across the sectors that we depend on, and ultimately the citizens that we serve in the government. So welcome.
Great. Thanks, Pete. Happy to be here.
Yeah. Well, I know this is going to be a walk in the park. And as I promised you beforehand, we're going to acronym out a little bit at times, but
all right,
cut me off, as I will do the same if we go down that path a bit too much. Folks, let me just give you a little bit of background and brag about Maria, because those in the Beltway, and I'm sure beyond, know Maria Roat. Maria Roat is not only a seasoned C-level who has more C whatever titles in government, from CIO to CTO to Chief Information Security Officer, yada, yada, yada. You can read about that. What I was most excited, and again, thank you for your service in advance, is Maria served our country in the U.S. Navy and the Naval Reserve for just about 26 years, in addition to having a distinguished career so far in the federal government. She grew up in upstate New York, just to kind of personalize and humanize a bit that she's from that neck of the woods. And she's a graduate from not only University of Maryland, but the Harvard Business School and the Navy Senior Enlisted Academy. And that in and of itself speaks to a lot of the passion in serving our country. So Maria, thank you for that. Is there anything I've left out? Because I can list your bio here and go through it, but it's like 2 pages long, and I created it myself.
Yeah, no, that's good, Pete.
Yeah. And again, you've traversed, well, I should say you've ascended to, you're in the OMB today, you were at the Small Business Administration, the United States Department of Transportation, Homeland Security, many roles in Homeland Security, of course, in the U.S. Navy. And she is a geek, folks. She has an engineering background. Hear her story sometime about growing up and using computers, as we called them back in the day. So Maria, there you go. That's for the folks who are watching both today, tomorrow, and at some point in the future. I got a quick question for you. How are you dealing with this virtual world? Is technology enabling? Or are you at the point where you like using the tools that have always been there, but now we've been forced to use them? How's this pandemic affecting you personally and professionally?
Yeah, speaking of virtual, I'm in the office.
I can see that. I see those flags.
Yeah, I don't have a map and a flag this way at my house.
Looks good. So you're in the building today. So you're kind of back in there a couple days a week?
Yeah, I'm in generally about 3 days a week. But I think, flipping over to telework, many agencies, the federal government had everything in place already. And really the transition to telework was pretty seamless internally for the federal government, because people had laptops and they had the connectivity. And so you saw a pretty seamless transition. And I know, I'm coming in 3 days a week, and I talk to my folks online and bring up you know, whether it's Skype, Teams, pick your technology, and Zoom, and look where we are. And, you know, that's how we're communicating with everybody. It is, it's been pretty different. I'm somebody who walks around all the time. My assistants frequently, you know, are looking for me and where'd she go? Because I do walk around, and that's something that I've had to figure out how to do differently, right? To walk around and talk to people. Now it's just popping up on a chat, right? Hey, what's going on? Or calling somebody, you know, instead of doing that walk around. So it's been a little bit of an adjustment, but if you've got a high performing team that's used to working in that kind of environment, you can continue to do that. I'm just doing it a little differently.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. One of the things I'll probably bring up in a little bit here is this evolving workforce, which I know, as you know, one of those 21st century workforce stools of the PMA, the President's Management Agenda. And I appreciate that because, Maria, a lot of these interviews I do, I mean, I'm a former Fed who did the commute and every day on the Metro. I'm not going to say I miss it, but I could tell you I've become acclimated. And I think the fact that I was able to get a meeting with Maria Roat on a Monday for 40 minutes was a heck of a lot easier than going through the machinations to try to get in the building. And I think that what I could share is, and you probably heard too, is a lot of folks in the federal government are saying, hey, we've always had the tools. Now it's enabling us to do our jobs, whether that's more effectively or, you know, working from home. Is that a sentiment you're hearing too in government?
I think so. And people can adjust their schedules, right? So instead of commuting in for an hour or whatever that time is, being, you know, working from 8 to 4 or 8 to 5, and then commuting home for an hour, I see a lot of adjustments on schedules where sometimes, because people have kids at home too, right?
Yes.
So I see people sometimes on very early in the morning, and then they may not be, depending on their work schedule. And then, you know, they're putting in their time. They're just adjusting how they do that throughout the day. So I'm certainly seeing that, and that's definitely not unusual across the board.
Yeah, I have 4 in school right now, and a dog, which you might hear bark. And I got to tell you, I am beefed up on all the Wi-Fi that I can actually get into my house, and that's been a change. So, but I enjoy that I can wear jeans and at least a sweater and still come across professional, hopefully. Okay, Maria, before we get into like work stuff in terms of mission and maybe helping explain a bit more about this incredible role that you have in responsibility and technology, we talked about it. I care about journeys and formation. So can you, for us, share a little bit about going back to that age of 17 or prior and how you and where you are now along the way? A lot of these roles, and you could do it however you want. Talk about how you've seen the technology landscape change and how it shaped your leadership style.
Oh, man, I think I've seen a little bit of everything through the years. You know, I was, you know, in high school, and, you know, growing up in upstate New York, anybody who's from New York is familiar with the BOCES program, you know, for auto mechanics and cosmetology. But, you know, in the 70s, they actually had a computer programming course with BOCES. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of interesting. So that's how I got my start in computers is through BOCES in upstate New York, in Herkimer County. They were offering it, which was actually kind of cool. And it was on a little Burroughs mainframe, and I learned how to key punch, and I learned how to program an RPG too, if anybody's ever heard of that. Some of the old timers likely. But yeah, and then I found out my cousin was working in a computer room, and I was probably 16 at the time, and I went to visit him, and I'll tell you, he worked in this computer room, and he was hanging tapes, and he was doing all kinds of stuff, and he was telling me about all the stuff these computers were doing, and it was in the financial sector at the time. And I thought, this is really cool. And it was kind of, that's all she wrote after that. No pun intended.
You got the bug. You got the bug.
Yeah. And so I ended up joining the Navy because they were actually doing operational stuff on computers. So I continued to work on mainframes initially. And I was a tape librarian. That was my first job in the Navy, Pete.
Wow. Wow.
This is a great big huge room, and they had racks and racks of tapes. And I'll tell you what, I worked on my muscles, and
I bet you did. Racks.
But I did. I ended up working as an operator, and you know, after I got off active duty, I got in the federal government as a GS3, and just continued to work on computers. I've gone from mainframes to, PCs, working on PCs to networking to engineering, and it's actually been a really cool journey because I've seen just the evolution of technology, and I've been able to be on the front end of some of that because I worked for Navy Medical for about 6.5, almost 7 years, and I got to see. This was in the 90s. I got late 80s, 90s, and I got to see from the ground up, where there was an AT&T 3B2 computer,
Here she goes. You're geeking out, but I love it. I love it. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yep, it was, on Unix, and I was a little administrator, and we used to have these 2.4 circuits, and that was a big deal. And I got to working with Navy Medical. I was in Norfolk, and I was the detachment lead. And I got to see Navy, the hospitals, medical, dental clinics all over the East Coast in Europe I was responsible for. But I got to walk the hospitals and put in where the first comm closets were, where the network drops were, working with the contractors that were pulling the cables and being able to walk through including right up the road here in Bethesda when it was, the National Naval Medical Center.
Yep. Not too far from my house.
Yep. I have been through that entire hospital, including, pick the rooms and where the network drops were going to go and comm closets and all over the place. So it was just really cool. And it was the early days of Cisco. So I got to do all the hands-on work on the they were Cisco the routers were MGSs and IGSs were the first ones I worked on, and Baynet activity switches. And so I had my hands on a lot of stuff, but what was really cool about it was that was the early days of network management. HP OpenView. Think about the mid-90s. HP OpenView, Cisco rolling out their first tools like Cisco Works, their first tools, monitoring Remedy version 1, and stitching that stuff together when nobody else was doing that work. It was so cool to be able to work on a lot of that and build that out. And now you fast forward to like where DHS is, and they're rolling out CDM. And I think sometimes, wow, I did that 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. But we rolled out solutions like that globally for the entire Navy Medical, right? Globally, 17 hospitals, 3 medical treatment facilities, the big ones, and all the clinics. It was actually it's been an incredible ride. And I've gone from a GS3 now to SES, and I think I've hit every grade in between at least once because I've gone up and down a couple times to move around. So I've worked on so much stuff. It's cool.
Well, I'm going to paraphrase a little because you jumped over a lot of stuff, and I got to tell you again, thank you for all that you're doing, Maria. I'm a huge fan. I think the fact that you say you've walked the hospitals, you know how to stitch things together. I used to say the same. I ran a data center at Department of Education. Never thought I'd end up being a CTO at an agency, which we'll get to in a minute because I know you were. But I believe that, and I think you just articulated it so eloquently, is that unless you're doing it, it's hard to really understand what's involved. And in a world where tech is constantly changing, and here you are now serving the White House, serving the administration, agnostic role that you have, technology that is staying in front of that and then helping agencies develop their roadmaps. It's a chore, but I agree with you 100%. And it is exciting. And folks, if you didn't catch that, I mean, Maria's using words that are what were the underpinnings for the internet and how it works and how it connects. That's the hard stuff. So Maria, yes, you went from DHS and you were the CTO at transportation. You were the CIO at SBA, and of course, where you are now. Let me ask you a quick question, totally coming out of left field. What did you see the role? How is the role differentiated from when you were a chief technology officer, visionary, forward-leaning at DOT, to jumping into that, what I believe is a mostly operational role, a CIO job in government? What was the big difference? And I don't mean good, bad, or indifferent, but what was the hardest part to adapt to moving to a CIO?
Yeah, it's funny, when I applied for the job over at transportation, I actually applied for the deputy CIO job, and the CIO at the time said, I looked at your resume. He said, I want you for my CTO, not my deputy. Right. So that's how I ended up in the CTO role. But it was actually really good working at DOT as the CTO, because I worked not only within the office of the CIO on the IT footprint there and the systems and support systems. I was also working on the transportation sector. So Secretary Fox at the time, for example, was doing a big smart cities, right? That big competition around
Oh
smart
yeah.
those mid-sized cities across the United States. And I worked with the folks who were doing the V2V and V2I and understanding what they were doing as they were trying to roll out, because DOT is really about policy, right? What are those lanes? And you've got DOT rolls out policy, but they've got so many test beds that help inform the policy. So being able to see from a CTO perspective what it takes with the testing and the development to really get to a policy, and how DOT rolls a policy out. And I was there when the first guidelines came out on the drones that the FAA rolled out.
Wow.
So being able to see
IoT in action, right?
yeah, that was really early on. And, and it was working with the folks, like I said, doing with the vehicles, right? The V2V, V2I, understanding, the data piece of it. And what do you do with that data, right? You don't want to store all that data. What do you keep? What do you discard? It's data at the edge that we're talking about now. And then looking at data across all of DOT, we ran a project looking at safety data across the entire department, right? Whether you're a pedestrian or a bicyclist or driving a car or a tractor trailer or flying. We did a project around data. We did a whole series of sprints around that to really look at what safety data we had across the United States. And it was really cool to see when you started bringing all that data together, where the worst place in the country is to be a pedestrian, right? Chicago and Houston, based on accidents, right? And then seeing how, over the course of a year, when you start to visualize that, oh, there was a snowstorm here. That's why there were all these accidents here. And looking at, just safety overall and accidents across the whole country and looking at a year's period of time was actually kind of cool. And you start overlaying pedestrians and cars and pick your mode of transportation. So those are some of the projects working on as a CTO where I wouldn't have been as in depth as I was, because even going over as the CIO, you mentioned being operational, way operational, but also I had to be a business leader because I had to understand the business of SBA to help inform what the technology decisions needed to be
yes.
to support the business. So, while it was a lot of operational, it was still a lot of business. And back to your question, really having to understand that.
Yeah, well, let me jump because I'm writing down, by the way, awesome tweets that I can't while you're talking. You mentioned transportation sector and informing policy. You talked about smart cities, which shout out, that's near and dear to my heart. And I think the fact that you had the opportunity to work in one of our 16 critical infrastructure sectors, transportation, where vehicles, connected cars, for those of you out there, think of the car is hundreds of millions of lines of code. It's a device on a network. And Maria's talking about data at the edge, driving around on highways, sensors and roads. I think it was a precursor to leveraging data as a strategic asset, which is what you were doing before there was a PMA. And again, I was not implying that every CIO job is only operational, but boy, oh boy, I thought I wanted to be one. I was like you. We were CTOs rocking it. But I just pivoted. I'm like, I'm done with data centers and the like. But the mission, you talk about mission. So let's pivot to that, maybe use some exemplar or two with SBA. You go over there. You do have to learn, as you say, the business. How did you engage the mission as a Fed, a thought leader, as the IT guru? How did you engage at the SBA to get those folks to share their technology requirements for the mission?
Sometimes it was really about understanding the mission. If you look at, for example, at SBA, I talked a lot about the 360 view of the customer, because I picked up early on that we had, lots of counseling programs, lots of data on small businesses, but we really didn't have a good 360 view of that customer. I picked up on that really early on and said, wow, how powerful would it be to have that data together, right? Stitch the data together. You don't have to move it or things like that, to start with, but understanding how a business engages with SBA from, their first counseling to their first microloan to growing their business, or maybe they're, participating in one of the innovator, right? SBIR or one of those, and understanding that journey of a small business. I got that. I got
Yes.
that real quick. And I said, oh, okay. But I have the technical background to say, I know how to make that happen. But I think part of it is sharing some of the vision and communicating with the business leaders to communicate the value of understanding that journey of their customers, and that technology can help enable that and really help the business of SBA, because SBA is a bank, right? It's got
Yes.
loans, it's got counseling, it's, all of these things that it does. And really having that ability to see those customers and meet them where they are, if you will, and having that information. But again, taking that information and that data, and then how do you be proactive, right? And marketing. Think about that from an SBA perspective. If you understand somebody came for counseling and they got a loan, and then if you understand what a traditional journey is or a different journey, you can start marketing SBA products if you think about it, right? Using the information and the data and understanding journey that people have gone through. So as a CIO, knowing those kind of things and being able to bring that together to say, look, we've got some powerful capability here, business. Let me help you get there.
So Maria, thank you. And by the way, none of this is scripted. I told you organically, you're just getting me to think of some new questions that I did not prep Maria for. She's just an awesome conversationalist. So I think the reason I asked the initial question was it's hard to navigate an agency sometime. I was working at the DOE. I worked at the education department. I like to say the smallest cabinet level and one of the largest. And as an ambassador for innovation like yourself, I had to knock on a lot of doors and get folks to build trust in me that I would listen actively and also say, hey, how can we better serve you in the technology shop supporting your mission, whether it was in fossil energy, renewables, disadvantaged school districts, et cetera. So you had that experience as well. So before we get to like OMB and the awesomeness that OMB is, and again, it's an important place and maybe folks need to understand, but hey, I don't think you all are going to be able to just go knock on the door at OMB and get a meeting with Maria, and she's going to tell you how you can help spearhead, accelerate, or whatever you government industry relationship, because she's a busy person. It's a hard place to get into. Maria, industry and government have a symbiotic relationship. You know it, I know it, we've both been sold to. I get to observe now on the outside the challenge industry often faces getting to know a federal employee, the way they think, the unique mission that they may be trying to sell into. And I say sell, but really partner with. Do you have any suggestions or thoughts on how industry could better position itself? A lot of the time I say it's do your homework. Before even trying to have a meeting with somebody inside the federal government to extol a lot of that value proposition that you talk about to support a requirement. How can industry do a more effective job collaborating with the government?
There's a ton of, good government groups out there, right? That you get a ton of federal participation as well as industry participation. And I think those are valuable, that way you can have an environment where you can exchange ideas and work on projects together. But I also think that, I've had in my experience, companies just come in and want to upsell me something, right? And without knowing the business, knowing what my priorities are, I've always been very open. Here's what we're doing, here's what we're working on, here's the direction we're headed in, even at SBA and DOT. And while I was on FedRAMP, here's what's going on. And I've tried to be very open around that. And when somebody comes in and they've just not done their homework, I look for that ahead of time. Don't come in and upsell me something without saying, how is that going to help the business of SBA? That's really what I need, outside of those, like I said, outside of those good government groups, where there's partnership and lots of projects
Sure.
going on and things. There's also that other aspect of where I'm just going to sell you something. Well, No, just don't tell me something. What's the value you're going to bring to me and to my business and the mission and the work that we're doing?
Yeah, Maria, that just for me even helps underpin that I can't take the government guy out of me. I always say I'm probably going to be back there at some point. And I always hope that, what I'm maybe call it mentoring industry on is it's pretty simple and it's all hidden in plain view. There's the IG reports, there's performance.gov, there's strategic plans, there's dashboards that basically say, here's where we need help by agency, whether it's for artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, yada, yada, yada. And I appreciate and echo what you were saying. And I think that's important for anybody who is looking to sell into, but think about tell, don't sell, tell how your value hits an agency's needs. And I always say facts tell, but stories sell. Use examples of where else you've done it, right? I mean, if you're a company.
Yeah, I mean that's where you get the most value. Here's where we worked on this for agency X or agency Y, and we've done this, 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 and this, and here's how that agency benefited from it. Great. Okay, but then how's it going to help me too? So, bringing in those perspectives is just incredibly useful.
Okay, so I hope our industry folks watching say, okay, those aren't out of the blue tips, but it's logical and it requires you homework to do that. Okay, Maria, part of the question is going to be how can government, better enable that conversation to occur? But let's go to OMB. People hear president's management agenda. They hear IT modernization or transformation and data that needs to be accountable and needs to be transparent. And there needs to be a 21st century workforce, of which I think is the most important. It's like technology is not replacing, but enabling folks. Can you speak just where you are now and how you feel the PMA in general is helping drive a lot of the innovation in government? And feel free to go down that path of where cyber or R&D or technology generally is really enabling the government to do what it says it's doing about creating industries of the future.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's the PMA, the initiatives like the federal data strategy, all the work going on in cybersecurity. There's just a ton of programs, including the workforce. There's a lot going on, and when you start looking at all these pieces and parts, really just advancing what the federal government's doing, because you take the federal data strategy for example, right? There's a lot of work going on around data.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody had a CDO, but part of really what the federal data strategy is driving at is bringing everybody up on their maturity level to the same level, right? So you see agencies that are full in, and you see really good pockets of good stuff going on, but where are we as a federal government as a whole? And I think these bigger strategic initiatives really raises everybody up, right? Puts in some of that foundation or continues to raise those maturity levels. Just like I was talking about the federal data strategy, the work around cybersecurity, continuing to build up on all of that. The workforce, prime example, a couple of years ago, we did the Cyber Workforce Reskilling Academy. If you remember that, right?
Oh yeah, totally.
Workers who don't know anything about cybersecurity, a ton of success around there because people really had the aptitude. The folks who ended up coming to the top of the pile and got trained, they had a ton of aptitude for cybersecurity, and it allowed them to say, okay, they could move on into cybersecurity roles. So being able to use the power of the federal government to do that. And we've got the data science training program going on right now. So those are those big initiatives that start the ball rolling on getting people trained on data science and other activities, which I think it just raises everybody in the federal government. There's more to do. And it's not just the PMA. I think the PMA is just one piece. It's also things like the IDEA Act, right?
Yes.
All that web and forward facing. And accessibility is a big part of that, right? Making sure things are accessible to all those various populations and making sure. And I think automating some of the things we're doing. So the PMA, I think, is one piece, but there's a lot of other moving parts as well that are really driving to that bigger modernization and push across the federal government.
Well, you had a great role and responsibility, and I hopefully did my part helping out with this recent executive leadership conference where we talked about a lot of those tenets of cyber and technology and transformation and modernization and terms we use that could be a mile wide and an inch deep. But sometimes when you drill down into that, I think of these industries of the future. And folks, Maria is referring to this president's management agenda, but I say go to whitehouse.gov, go to performance.gov. I'm reading off. If you go to management.cio.gov, see where there's a lot of information that we're looking here at the IT ambassador of government, if you will. That's what I like to think of you as, is constantly teaching and mentoring and coaching. You know, your days of running an agency's IT, Maria, are different now. And I would like to share in a minute here how that perch you're on now over there in the White House is so different and unique. But I think you articulated it's a lot of sharing information, bringing people together, doing those leading people and leading change. I see the administration, and again, very bipartisan here, committed to advancing industries of the future. If I'm Joe Sixpack hearing the government, what are they doing for me? And they talk about R&D and AI, quantum, 5G, biotech, advanced manufacturing. Those sound powerful. And I come from the school that tech is not the problem. The sectors are important to us every day. And whether it's a smart city or just a city, impact on humanity. That's another one of my connect dots, build bridges, but really show how tech, humanity, and culture intersect. Do you find, I guess, in your role, and the question there is, what are these industries of the future, the art of the possible? Is it a tough go in government, feeling like you're not just complying, but you're actually sometimes in front of that 8-ball where you're like, we're making things happen? Do you have some examples of that where it's for Joe Sixpack out there to say the government is making things happen?
You know, I think, you know, to Pete, this is really interesting because when you look at the federal workforce, you know, if you talk to anybody, they're there because we serve the American public, right? We serve the citizens, and understanding what are those things that makes the citizens' lives better, right? You know, whether it's, you know, water treatment or things like that. What are those things? Safety, right? Department of Transportation, making cars better, making cars safer. And not just cars, think about intersections and things like that. And I think there's, when you look at across the federal government, that is always the mission. What are we doing to make things better? Like you said, Joe Sixpack, right? What are we doing to make lives better? Are we moving the needle? Are we making, you know, things as simple as digital forms? We just flipped to telework this year. And guess what? All our brick and mortar buildings closed. Oh, guess what? What are we doing to continue to connect with the public digitally, right? So you can't go into a brick and mortar. I mean, how long? Everything was completely shut down for a long time, and there's still many buildings that you don't go to. But how are we using technology to digitally enable those people, right? To make their lives better. But, you know, most everybody's got a phone, right? They got a phone, they got or two, yeah, or two, or whatever. but being able to make things better for the public and enhance the experience. So when you look across the VA, for example, and veterans, think about the VA and the work that they've done. They have just accelerated.
Yes.
They took some of the foundational work they did with telehealth, right? All the work around that, and being able to connect through, you know, pick your medium, right? And see people and telehealth and the work they're using to really advance healthcare for the veterans of this country. You know, you hear the CIO talk about it, and he'll talk about the veterans, whether they're 21-year-old or 101-year-old, right? That's his customer base. And how do you make things better for those folks to get the services they need when they can't leave their house?
Yeah, I love these exemplars for me even. I mean, I'm listening to you as like, yes, if I'm watching that on the 6 o'clock news, yes, they're speaking to me. It's not just about politics inside the Beltway. I want to shout out to our friends who are, Gary Washington at USDA talks about the farmers, and you mentioned the VA. I just chatted with Dr. Joe Ronzio, who was educating me the other day on just how the VA is so involved with the CARES Act and with COVID, but also the DoD, and looking at the science of and the bioinformatics and how NIH plays into that with my colleague at Eric.
Pete, you've got, Department of Labor and three other agencies that work together on automating some of the visa process.
Yeah, which is a component. Yeah. And Maria, that's to me, I think,
that's huge.
So let's pivot to that for a minute here. We hear technology, and again, some people, whether you like it or not, will say, well, Maria Roat, she's the IT person for government. I think that we get lost sometimes in the cloud, data, communications. They're all part of that. Back to your days as the systems engineer, data center operator, ping, power, pipe, router, switches. That's all important. I think, and again, this is an opinion, so I'd love to get your feedback on when I think of how crowded and clouded, pun intended, the market is. And we've got not just the Internet of Things anymore, but the industrial Internet of Things, which speaks to your transportation experience. You mentioned healthcare, you mentioned the farmers and USDA. Maria, it's really hard to distill sometimes these products. And we talked earlier about how industry, can be more effective in translating. What would you say if you had a bunch of Fed technology influencers in government, as I like to call them, regardless of title, the conversation with industry? Do you feel the government is hitting its mark on doing more of that outreach to where is the, not bleeding edge, but technology and solutions that we need to bring in? Because put acquisition aside, it's a long pole in the tent. That always seems to be sometimes what kills the conversation. How much of that are you seeing, or would you like to see more of, where the Fed's taking initiative to engage industry and say, tell us how you can solve these problems we have, not just point them to a website or get a pitch on a panel, inside the Beltway?
Yeah, I think there's opportunities to really bring in more innovation, right? DoD is just done a ton in that space. You're probably pretty familiar with that, about bringing people in and bringing in for a short project. Well, bringing in some of that innovation, and I think there's more opportunities for that. And I heard a CISO speaking earlier today. And he said that, part of his job from a security perspective is to help allow for that innovation, even as companies are coming in, and get the security barriers out of the way too. Because a lot of times in the federal government, it's too hard to be, because security is going to say no. Well, to hear a CISO today, earlier today, say, hey, my job is to get out of the way and help advance innovation. And I think this is where, companies shouldn't let some of that be blockers. And I don't think, CIOs aren't letting that be blockers, but I think it should be easier to be able to do it. I think the mechanisms are there. We just need to take advantage of some of that.
Yeah, what's resonating is, again, shout out to the good folks at NIST. 800-160 comes to mind. Build security into your products. Don't let FedRAMP certification. This is Pete speaking, but folks always ask me, should I bring it up? And I'm like, look, it is what it is. You're either compliant or you're not, or you're on the road to, but talk about mission and how you can support mission. Feds want to hear that. So I'm hearing you echo a bit of that, but Maria, I agree. I think it's, again, symbiotic, and thank you. All right, one more question, then we go to parting shot. Maria, we're turning the calendar here soon. We have what appears to be maybe a new, or most likely an administration change. I always think technology is bipartisan, and whatever's there, we still got to communicate and move forward. So this is not going down that route. What are you most excited about in 2021? Is there initiative? Is it, are you thinking 5G and AI? I mean, are you seeing, or are you personally excited about something that you think is going to, bear us some fruit in 2021 in the government?
I'm not going to talk about all those technologies. What's really, I think is exciting moving forward this year, we were able to show how we got out of our own way with bureaucracy, right? We were able to execute this year. We were able to get stuff done. We got stuff done very fast. I know I did it as a CIO. I saw the CIO community. They made things happen. And they worked with their CFOs, and they worked with their acquisition folks, and they executed and got stuff done. And for 2021, as we're looking at IT modernization, sustained IT modernization across the federal government, I want to see that momentum continue. we showed how we could move very fast as a federal government, and how do we not go backwards to saying, oh, well, we have to do this and we have to do that. How do we keep that going in 21 and into 22, and keep that as we're looking at just sustained IT modernization across the federal government? We've got amazing CIOs. The CIO Council is incredible. It's a great group, and you know, they work really well together as a team. They share ideas, and really to sustain that. And I want to see that continue in 21.
Okay, well, you kind of used your parting shot, which seemed to be a great one there. So you're going to have a little bit of pressure put on because I need another one, but succinctly, even though I would love to hear you because that's kind of what it's about. But I love the word sustainment. I loved the shout outs to your C-level colleagues. And I really mean that. I mean, Maria, CIO, CTO, CFO, CPO, CAO, CDO, folks, they're all there. Chief risk officers, Maria's, I think, pointing out that we have to come together as a community and government to help industry. And industry, you got to understand, there's not one person you sell to, you're selling to the mission. So that's my parting shot on that awesome summary of yours. So if I can, given we've covered Utica, we've covered the fact that you were in the Navy, that you were a computer geek who loved to code on computers, which is a word we hardly ever hear anymore.
Wait, let me caveat that, Pete. I'm not a good coder.
I didn't say you were good. I just said
that's not something I found. I learned early on that is not my swim lane.
Lady Maria, I'm like you. I tried it in high school. Computer science. I used to drive myself crazy. Like I could figure this out. And it was like, folks were like, Pete, you're just not cut out for it. Don't worry.
I just had the patience to sit there.
Okay. Well, I did say coder. I didn't say a great one. So, hey, I understand. But given this was a story. This was the little bit of a taste of Maria Roat's walkabout. You know, what I love and again appreciate is, given all of what we talked about, you know, you're in a position where you don't know what next year's going to be. Are we still in the pandemic or not? You know, what's your shout out to close this out, you know, based on your journey and what you love doing? And I know you do, serving our country. What do you want to leave with the audience?
You know, Pete, I've worked, you know, my entire career almost, except for about 5 years when I went to the private sector, and working for the federal government and being in public service and being about the mission and about serving, you know, the people of the United States, or, you know, all of those public, the American public and our customers out there. You know, there's many things you can do in the federal government that you will never do in private industry. So that's kind of my parting shot, because there's things I have been able to do as a public servant, really cool stuff, being on the leading edge and bleeding edge sometimes of technology. People don't get that. And working for the federal government, you get to do some really cool stuff. So that's my parting shot. And that's why I've stayed for so long.
Well, that is a fantastic parting shot. I want to thank you. Don't go anywhere because I do need my Maria and Pete selfie. But when I'm going to stop this just again by thanking you. I know you're busy. You are an influencer. You're a rock star. I respect you. And I just thank you for taking some time out of your day.
Thank you, Pete. This has been great.